I hate water. Never once have I considered swimming or even just cooling off myself with it. I drink it and leave everything else for others. Having grown up in Lullaby City, I have been relatively safe, but there is no such thing as coincidence. It was late, maybe 5 o'clock. I should have been finished sweeping the Lullaby Hotel, but today had been especially busy for me, so I passed up the chore until the end of the day. I had been cleaning up one of the rooms when I heard a faint crying coming from the other end of the building. Naturally, I stuck my head through the doorway to get a look at the source of the noise, and to my suspicion, the crying was coming from a Pumpkaboo. I slowly approached the Pokemon, eager to find out what was wrong, but to no avail. The Pokemon disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I stood motionless, curious to see if it would come back. After a few minutes, the hotel manager had finally had enough fooling around and yelled at me. "Juno! Please get your work done!" I wrapped up my work at 6:03 and set off for my home when I noticed the little Pumpkaboo from before. It was closer to me this time, and I saw that it was not as little as I had thought it was. It was at least half my height, very large for a Pumpkaboo. It looked at me for a few seconds, and then it turned and left down Route 14. Route 14 scares me more than anything else in Kalos. A dark, damp fog hanging over murky waters isn't exactly what I would call a vacation. Although the occasional trainer had a Pumpkaboo, it wasn't a Pokemon people saw often in Lullaby. I was debating whether or not I should follow it when a few dark clouds over my head made the decision for me. As soon as I felt a raindrop, I knew I was out of there. I darted home, weaving between the raindrops as to avoid getting wet. I finally arrived at my house and once inside, pulled off my dripping clothes and got changed. The next day was rather slow at the Lullaby Hotel, so I decided to look around for the Pumpkaboo from the previous day. After almost an hour of searching, I found it by a bench crying like before. As I approached it, its cry slowly became a demented laugh, before fading out of existence again. This time, I didn't wait around for an invitation. I ran as far away from that spot as I could. Due to me running forward without looking, I bumped into one of the Hex Maniacs from Route 14 who was going to heal her Pokemon. After picking herself off the ground, she stared at me with a crazed grin and said, "It follows." Scrambling back to my feet, I took off down the road to head for the safest place I could think of, my home. However, my feet had a different idea, and before I knew it, I was standing in Route 14. I tried to turn back, but there was a part of me wondering what I would encounter in the swamp. Before I could move, however, I felt an eerie presence behind me. Sure enough, the Hex Maniac was there with a distraught look on her face, as though something had caught her off guard. There was a faint singing coming from the treetops. That's when I noticed that the Hex Maniac was floating. Rather, she was hanging by her neck. A long pink arm was extended from the treetops, holding up the Hex Maniac by her throat. I didn't ask if she was alright. She was dead for certain, and I didn't want to share her fate. I did the only thing I could. I ran towards the swamp. The bog was murky, alright, a very mysterious place, but other than the occasional Quagsire or Stunfisk, the only thing I heard was the singing. It constantly grew louder and louder, as though it was mocking me in my situation. Finally, after an hour of trudging through the swamp water, I had decided to take a rest. The shallow part of the swamp was behind me now, with the deep parts ahead of me. I entered a small house, unaware what was inside. I entered the house silently and was greeted by a man offering to tell me a story about the house. I refused, already frightened by his appearance. He seemed very thin, as though he hadn't eaten in days, and his eyes were bloodshot. I begged the man to let me rest, and he gladly allowed it. I slowly lowered my head to the pillow and lay there, staring out of the dusty, dirty window. Just as I finally closed my eyes, I was sure I had seen the Hex Maniac staring through the window. The next morning, I was about to thank the man for letting me stay overnight, but when I got up, he was nowhere to be found. I left a note and gathered my wits. If I headed farther out, I would have a lesser chance of running into the Hex Maniac, or worse, the mysterious arm. There was no way I was going through the thick swamp, so I set off for Lullaby City, praying that the water was still shallow. Luckily, I was cut a break and the water was even lower than it was a day prior. I had a fairly calm walk to Lullaby and arrived at the hotel before anyone else. I left the owner of the hotel a note explaining that I would be gone due to health reasons. I would be heading to Lullaby City to escape the event. As I was approaching the gate for Route 15, I was stopped by the sound of someone singing. It was a demonic drone of a song, and I seemed to be the only one who heard it. Before I could react, I was grabbed by a large arm. I was turned around forcefully and was face to face with a Gorgeist. It stared at me, singing and swaying its long pink arms. It was much larger than most Gorgeists, and it seemed to be holding something behind its back. I instantly recognized it as the Pumpkaboo from before and realized that it had evolved. It gave me a look as though it wanted to show me something, its eyes pleading for me to stay put. Finally, it pulled the Hex Maniac out from behind itself with its long pink arm. I ran long and hard across town, dodging people and avoiding the Gorgeist. I finally arrived at home an hour ago. I haven't seen the Gorgeist since I shot through the door. My neighbor had brought my mail inside for me, and on the top of the stack was a note from my father, who had been journeying around the Unova region for the past 2 years. On the note was nothing but English writing, saying, "It follows."